Hello everyone, and welcome to the Smart Dublin Open Data webinar. We've got a bunch of speakers, really exciting talks on open data today. We're going to talk about open data in action, some real life examples of how local authorities are using open data. We'll also speak about the new EU directive on open data. And we'll be sharing some really useful ways of local authorities of how they can publish their open data. So without further ado, I'll just do a little housekeeping first. So this webinar is being recorded, so it will be made available through your local authorities, through your various intranets, and the slides as well from the presentations you'll see today will be made available to you as well. So we are recording the webinar, and we also have a Q&A at the end of this session. So if you have any questions for any of our speakers, and you'll see them listed on the agenda sheet there, if you have any questions, do please put them in the Q&A function. So that's that little speech bubble with a question mark. So just type in your questions, and if we don't get to all of them today on the webinar, we'll definitely pull together a little FAQ sheet and get you all of the answers of any of your questions later in the weeks and months ahead. So I'd like to kick off and invite our Chief Executive from Fingal County Council, AnnMarie Farrelly, to just say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Smart Dublin Open Data webinar. I suppose when we talk about open data, we are referring to non-personal data, and that's generated by public bodies, which can be made accessible for general reuse and redistribution. Here in Fingal County Council, we played a leading role when it comes to open data. Back in 2010, Fingal Open Data was launched to enable citizens to access data relating to Fingal. It was the first open data website in Ireland, and since then we've seen the growth in open data initiatives nationally, including the adoption of an open data as a fundamental principle of smart city initiatives, including Smart Dublin. In the past, the publication of open data has perhaps been seen as a voluntary exercise, a nice-to-do activity, in addition to the day job, etc. There are a number of reasons why open data should now move to becoming a proactive and must-do activity for local authorities. Local authorities are getting criticised for not acting fast enough on certain issues or not demonstrating enough transparency, all of which gets highlighted in the media. Open data offers an opportunity for councils to be proactive and transparent in our work by publishing relevant open data. There's a new EU directive being transposed into Irish law in July, which affects all public bodies. This calls for a positive obligation on public sector bodies to make public data available as open data rather than on request, and to make all existing documents available unless access is restricted. Freedom of information requests are on the rise, and in Fingal County Council, for example, approximately 70% of those requests are for non-personal data in nature. This presents huge opportunities to reduce the FOI burden, which affects us all, not just the freedom of information officers. The speakers you're going to hear from today will showcase some real examples of how public sector organisations and private companies are using open data to improve quality of life and deliver more efficient public services. You'll also hear about the new EU directive on open data and the role of public bodies. We hope the webinar today will help you understand the value of open data for you, your council, as well as for other stakeholders. I wish to thank all the speakers and the organisers of the webinar for their efforts in making it happen. I'll hand you back to Aisling, and thank you, and I hope you enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, AnnMarie. Well, I'm not going to wait too long. I want to invite our first speaker to present. So we have Rhoda Kerins, Head of the Open Data Unit in the Department of Public Expenditure of Reform. So over to you, Rhoda.
Thank you, Aisling, and good afternoon, everyone. As Aisling said, I lead the Open Data Unit in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. The initiative was commenced in 2014 and is at the forefront of the open data in Europe. Just need to set my clock. The main aim of the Open Data Initiative in Ireland is to provide data quality for reuse, to facilitate transparency in government, to build trust, and to stimulate new business applications, and really to overall improve the lives of citizens. Ireland's Open Data Portal is recognised as a leader in the EU and in the OECD. And there are, and I'd recommend you check out data.gov.ie. There are over 12,500 data sets there from about 120 publishers. So what is open data? A piece of content is considered open if it is open to anyone to freely access it. It is free to use, to modify, to share for any purpose. And really the only caveat is to acknowledge the original source of the data. And so what does that mean, and why is that important? If we consider for a minute the vast amounts of data that governments hold and local authorities hold, if we think about the economic data, statistical data, planning data, housing data, through to geospatial data and everything in between. And this data can be made available for reuse for economic and social purposes, and it can facilitate genuine improvements for society. Across Europe, open data is having a real impact in the lives of its citizens. Data provided is saving people time, it's providing better information for better decision making, and creating efficiencies resulting in better services for everyone. And this has been one of the driving forces behind the rewrite of the Open Data Directive, which we will take a look at shortly. The directive itself aims to make more data available for reuse and will come into force in Ireland this week. So how many of us, before we make a decision, such as going to the beach on a lovely day like the weather we have today, we check our phones for information that might be on the tides, on the water quality, on the weather forecast, the quickest route maybe to the nearest beach. If we are cycling, we might want to check if a bicycle is available. If you're taking the bus, when is the next bus going to arrive? Or perhaps you want to check if there is a recycling unit on the way so you can drop off the weekend's accumulation of jam jars or milk bottles or whatever it might be. So this is open data in action. Next slide, please. Ireland is recognised as a leader in open data in the EU and in the OECD. And we came from a fairly standstill position in 2014 to being a leader in Europe now in open data. And there are three pillars that underpin this success. And it's our portal, data.gov.ie, our publication guidelines, which set out the standards for the publication of data, and our open data strategy. So the strategy is a government policy and was adopted in 2017 with the core objective of the publication of high value government data, making it in open format, making it publicly available and freely reusable. The National Open Data Strategy sets out a number of actions that public sector bodies are required to undertake to comply with the strategy. And these actions include to conduct a data audit, so looking at what data you hold, drawing up a publication plan for the data that you can publish. And as been said, it's data, non-sensitive data, non-personal data, obviously. So putting in place a data catalogue, and this is also required under the public service data strategy and for the public service data catalogue. So what you should consider are things like, is your data in fully open formats? Are your data sets machine readable? How frequently do you release data? And are these data sets kept up to date? Could you make the data available in real time via APIs? And most importantly, is the correct and full metadata available with your data set? And again, the full data set, the full requirements and standards required are set out in the publication guidelines. We encourage public bodies to accommodate requests for data within reason and be open to collaborating with reusers, because it's important to understand how simple improvements to the data you're making available can make it much more reusable. And so things like maybe adding error codes or geocoding data can be a real benefit to the reusers of the data. Local authorities are also required to have open data liaison officers. And do you know who your liaison officer is? Next slide, please. Now, open data is an important element of a number of legislative and policies across government and the EU. So it doesn't just sit on its own in a silo, or it's not something that we do on the side. It's really part of what we do in our everyday work. So, of course, it's closely linked to the public service data strategy. And again, you can combine your efforts required for the public service data catalogue with what is required for open data. Next slide, please. This morning, we are going to see a number of excellent examples of how open data is being used, but I'd just like to draw your attention to a current project that we're engaged in, the Hale and Harty project. And this project involves a number of partners, including Fingal County Council representing the local authority sector. And it's an example of how data can be used to improve citizens' lives. So it's pulling diverse data together from such as amenities, sports facilities, parks, location facilities, etc., and providing it as a coherent suite of data through the portal. Next slide, please. The Open Data Directive is coming into force this week. We are hoping to have the Minister sign it on Wednesday. And this will require public bodies to release data in free and open formats. The driving principle of the directive is that data should be considered open by default, unless, as I said, it's personal or sensitive data. And that systems design must build in open data at the outset. The directive introduces an obligation on public bodies to release data in open formats and to open standards. It places an emphasis on providing data in real time and via APIs. The overall aim of the directive is to increase availability of open government data. And with this in mind, public bodies will be expected to provide a list of the data that they have available for reuse and to facilitate requests for data. Just bear in mind that the regulations are introducing a request process, and you will have 20 working days to facilitate a request from receipt. If the request is deemed unreasonable or not possible, it can be refused, but you must give the grounds for the refusal and you must provide the information for the means of redress, such as appeal to the Information Commissioner. And failure to comply, obviously, with a decision of the Information Commissioner will or could result in a fine. Next slide, please. An implementing act is a direct regulation which is enforceable at EU level. And there's the first implementing act under the Open Data Directive is currently being negotiated. And this will focus on the provision of high quality dynamic data. And data sets included in the implementing act will have to be made available free of charge in open machine readable formats and in real time via APIs. You can see the 6 themes there that the first implementing act will focus on, and obviously there will be lots of local authority data involved in that, local maps, administrative boundaries, addresses, transport networks, road signage, etc. And this data will have to be made available once the implementing act comes in force. Next slide, please. You are not alone, so don't panic when you look at what has to be done. There are numerous supports in place to help local authorities either begin their journey or to progress your open data journey. The publication guidelines have been updated in just this year, and they provide a how-to guide for publishing your data, and they set out the standards you should employ when publishing your data, such as the license, the metadata and the formats. We are putting in place a technical support services framework that's ongoing with OGP and should go to market within the next week as well. And that will assist public bodies to meet their obligations under the Open Data Directive. And it'll put in place a drawdown service for a suite of services to allow you to audit, catalogue and publish your data. Within the Open Data Unit, of course, you can always contact us. We're available to advise and support any local authority that is looking to advance their open data initiative. So thank you, and that's all from me this morning, and I'll hand you back to Aisling. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rhoda. That's great. A lot of information there. So if anyone does have a question for Rhoda, please put it into the Q&A function. I think I see 1 or 2 questions in there at the moment. But yeah, if you have a question, please please drop it in the Q&A and we will hopefully get to it at our Q&A session. And if we don't, we'll be following up anyway with a list of the answers. Next, we have Evelyn Cusack, a familiar face from the head of forecasting from Éireann. So I'm going to pass on to yourself, Evelyn.
Okay. I'm just unmuting there. I think it takes a second. Am I through?
Yeah, you're through now.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to Fingal for inviting me, and to Smart Dublin. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I suppose MapAlerter is famous for always sharing our forecasts and bad weather with you and bad warnings, etc. But if we just look at the first slide, first of all. I've a tiny little summary here. Now I know you'll get these slides later on. So open data is data or data that anyone can access, use and share. Open data can bring diverse benefits to governments, businesses and individuals. It has the power to help improve services, grow economies and protect our planet. Now, next slide, please. Now, you might think this is weird. Does anybody recognize data there from Star Trek? Well, just last week I've started watching Star Trek Generations. So to my delight, on Netflix there are 7 episodes with 25 7 seasons with 25 episodes in each season, and each one is about 45 minutes. So that was Data, who's an artificial intelligent being, if you like, in Star Trek, immune to nearly all biological diseases. So he would have done well with COVID, but vulnerable to technological hazards. But of course, next slide, please. We're on about open data. And MapAlerter's data represents a state of the atmosphere and climate. And MapAlerter's mission is to monitor, analyse and predict Ireland's weather and climate, and to provide a range of high quality meteorological and related information to the public. Now, for open data, or should I say data or data? I don't know, I'm mixed up, maybe it's too much American Star Trek. So when we look at open data, we must look that it should be as accessible as possible to all users and in the most appropriate format to facilitate the broad range of potential applications by those in universities, industry and research. Now, obviously, MapAlerter, and for example, our first live weather observation goes back to 1859. And it was transmitted via Morse code from our station in Valencia Observatory down on Valencia Island. So MapAlerter has this huge wealth of data going back into the mid-80s, 1800s rather. And even before that, we are taking weather logs that were kept by amateur weather forecasters going back into the 1700s. So we have a huge amount of data, but that's no use too if you want to have a look at stuff. So with the open data policy, we must put all this data into an accessible form. So I have there, if you just go onto our website, the last section there. Sorry, I can't see my own laptop there. It's too small. In into the about, if you go into www.met.ie and on the banner there, the very last section, about, and if you just drop down that menu, open data there is under specialized services. So there's a wealth of information there if you just click on that. So after this ceremony or this seminar, we have it all there laid out, and I have a link then later on in my presentation for our open data meteorologist Kieran Harper, and you can contact him. He's still on his summer break this week, but from next week he'll be totally at your disposal. So next slide, please. So this is just an example of all the weather stations that MapAlerter supports around the country. The blue ones there are rainfall stations. Now some of these are just sending data every month, some are every week, and then some are every hour, and some of our modern 80 automatic climate stations, we get data in for every minute it's updated. So obviously we have a huge amount of data. So next slide, please. And as well as overland, we also work with the Marine Institute and get information for sea conditions. The light shaded area is actually our sea area, and MapAlerter's sea area forecast for that area. And we use information from weather buoys, etc. Next slide, please. So this is an example of some of the output that we produce. On the left of the screen, the blue map there, that you could be forgiven for thinking that that's actually a map of our mountains, but it's actually our annual rainfall, because Ireland is poised on the edge of the Atlantic compared to the rest of Europe, and our prevailing wind is actually coming in from the Atlantic. It's between west and southwest in direction. So a lot of the moisture, a lot of the air that comes in across Ireland actually travels about 3,000 miles. Now the sun shines on the Atlantic and that evaporates, and that moisture-laden air hits Ireland. So it hits the McGillicuddy Reeks and Kerry, Sliebarnock and Clare, the Ox Mountains and Sligo, the Donegal Mountains, and the air can't go through the mountains, so it rises up, and then you get what's called orographic precipitation. And you can see here for Dublin, across the east of the country, you get maximum rainfall there corresponding to the Wicklow Mountains. And where I'm from in the Midlands, that little blue area there, sorry, I can't point to this now, I don't have the slides, but that little area there is actually the Slieve Blue Mountains. But Dublin City and Fingal is actually one of the driest parts of the country. But we don't like to tell people that in too much, they'd be totally jealous. So some days on a winter's day when it's raining heavily, it's hard to believe it, but you can see that Dublin is one of the driest parts of Ireland, with less than 1,000 millimetres in the year. Now the middle map there, as you can guess by the colours, that's actually a temperature forecast for today. And the orange and the red correspond to temperatures in the high 20s and into 30 degrees. And again, if you go on the MapAlerter website, we can see that we've issued yellow high temperature warnings today, and also orange. But Fingal County Council would be glad to see that we have only issued yellow for the Greater Dublin area. That's not to say that it's not very hot, and indeed we could get temperatures into the high 20s. In fact, we've got a record already, a July record for our station at the Phoenix Park. Now the map on the right is actually the sea temperature. What saves Dublin a lot in this kind of weather is that there is a sea breeze, which keeps things a little cooler. So the sea temperature there, I don't know if you can make out the numbers, it's 18. So it's about 16 to 18 degrees Celsius in Dublin Bay. So that if you've got an air temperature of 25, then a nice sea breeze can be very, very refreshing at this time of year. Okay, next slide. So that's just an example of some of our data. Now, just to read this for you, as I said, you can read it at your leisure later. MapAlerter fully supports and implements its open data obligations under EU directives. And we engage with, we're terrible for all these abbreviations in MapAlerter, like it's desperate. So we've got UMETSAT, EcoMet and ECMWF. So I'll just give you an example of what UMETSAT means. So next one, please. And can you play that? That's meant to be moving. No? Okay. So EUMETSAT stands for the European Organisation for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites. I mean, up to 10 years ago, we were only allowed to show the satellite images for every 3 hours, but now they're available for every 15 minutes. It's pretty now that's meant to be animation. Maybe when we email around these slides, you'll be able to see that in animation. But the white areas there are the cloud. So this was taken some time ago, and you can see the Sahara Desert clear, and that's, again, you'll see it in the animation that the weather actually circumvents the Sahara Desert, and that's why it's dry there. Ireland under cloud in this picture, but in fact, at the moment, if you go on our website, you can see it's hardly a cloud in the sky over Ireland. So next slide, please. So you go on to open data in data.gov.ie and for MapAlerter, and you can get 2,040 results, so a huge amount there. So I'll let you look through that at your leisure, but obviously we provide weather forecasts there and lots of other things. Now you can get a lot of this stuff live on our website, obviously. But you can get more specialised knowledge on data.gov.ie. So I've just given you one example in the next slide. So reconstruction of a long-term historical daily maximum minimum air temperature network data set for Ireland 1831 to 1968. So that's what I briefly mentioned earlier. There's lots of interesting things. Now you might wonder why you would need this, but you know, you may be doing some planning or construction or whatever. There's a huge amount of data there. So it's all there at your fingertips. But I just highlighted this for you, thought you might find it interesting. In 1871 in the Phoenix Park, on this day in 1871, the 20th of July, the air temperature was 18 degrees Celsius. Whereas today it's getting closer to 28 degrees Celsius. Now, in no way am I implying that it's global warming and our temperature has gone up by that amount, but it's just picking a particular day in time on this day. So that's just an example. So this is for stations of the second order at which systematic observations of temperature and other meteorological data are made at least twice a day. Castle, Botanic Gardens in Glasnevin, Fitzwilliam Square, Dublin, Phoenix Park and Trinity College. So there's a huge amount of data going back into the 1800s there for Dublin. Next slide, please. So wow.ie, now this is available on our public website. So this is very interesting. So we have our official weather stations in that, but the citizens can also contribute to this. And if you just show the next slide, we were delighted with our collaboration with Fingal County Council. And you can see that press release there on June the 17th, 2021. And primary schools to receive weather station rain gauges, and they will be feeding directly into our wow.ie network. So we're absolutely delighted with that and congratulate Fingal County Council on this very innovative and fantastic initiative. And at the very far back, that's one of our new forecasters, Emer Flood. Very aptly named for the bad weather, but Emer is a fantastic forecaster and she joined us during COVID and you can hear her regularly on radio now. So next slide. So this is what I just mentioned. MapAlerter has recently appointed an open data manager to lead the continuous development of our open data positive culture, and his name is Kieran Harper, and it's kieran.harper@met.ie. So you can read that at yourself. I'll finish up now. I don't want to delay you, but just the last slide. I hope just on your smartphones that all of you have downloaded the MapAlerter app, and that you've signed up for warnings notifications on the MapAlerter app. So you can get a show of hands there who has that, and please do so. And we have just issued status yellow and indeed orange level heat warnings. So if you're signed up on the MapAlerter app, you will get notifications for that. And it's very useful for your professional duties, because even when you're at home, as you know, the weather never stops. And of course, for all local county councils, etc., we're not all carrying around PCs with us, so everybody has a smartphone now, so you will get your notification. So my advice to you is to sign up for all warnings, and indeed for all counties, because it's good to be aware of what's around the country. And also, we just recently introduced 3-day warnings for marine as well for our Irish coastal waters, and particularly for local authorities and that in coastal areas. Obviously, this can have effect with coastal flooding, etc. So I think that's just within the time. I think that's, I can just end my, I was going to say broadcast, my presentation there.
Thanks very much, Evelyn. And it really goes to show how important open data is, especially when we look at our weather and from a local authority context, receiving, real-time weather updates for extreme weather updates as well for any of the storms. It's extremely important. And I know that our next speaker, Brendan Cunningham, I think is going to talk a bit about how we actually use open data, or how he uses open data in his work. And I believe some of that data does come from MapAlerter, so it's going to be useful to see that now. So I'll invite you yourself, Brendan, to share your slides, and over to you.
Thanks, Aisling. Can you see my slides okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to talk about our MapAlerter service, which is now used by most local authorities. Just over half actually are using the system. I'm going to give the quick overview in case any of the audience. So it's a communications service. It sends out alerts and messages. It's very targeted in who it sends alerts to. It would have traditionally started off 10 years ago when the system was launched. It was exclusively a member of the public kind of focus system. Since then, staff are now coming up with ideas how they get alerted to different things, major emergency teams, external stakeholders such as local media, Irish Water, for instance, different agencies like that, and the councillors love MapAlerter. They get a lot of heads-up notices for their municipal. The key words, I suppose, about the alerts are they're timely and they're consistent. So when data entry happens, whether it be manually from a member of staff filling out a form, or whether it be by open data and automation, it's very quick to publish all this out. And rules are set. Should text messaging be used? Should email, apps? We link with council social media channels so we can automate tweets and Facebook posts. And we have our own API for publishing that data. So the big benefit of the system over the years has definitely been it keeps people informed proactively, but on a local level. So local can be if you're getting an alert for a water outage or a road closure down the road, or it can be county-wide, as Evelyn was just mentioned, with weather warnings. So we'll hook up to MapAlerter's open data as well. Members of the public can provide 2 locations on the system, so we do not track the subscribers. We just say, what's your home location, what's your work location optionally, and with that we have the ability to get their commute route, and we can send council roadwork notices for interim locations. So that works very well. The green counties are councils that the green councils are those that are using MapAlerter. So if you lived in Carlow, say, and worked in Tipperary, you may well get road alerts with one MapAlerter account across the 3 councils with Kilkenny in the middle. So it works well from that point. And you're crisscrossing county boundaries. And over time, the council is building up a nice subscriber database. So this is the location of where people have subscribed on MapAlerter, and you can see that it more or less tallies with the councils that are using the system. So it's quite a nice subscriber list for the councils to communicate with. The top 6 categories here are kind of traditionally what MapAlerter would always have sent alerts out from over the past 10 years. At one stage, the severe weather warnings were manually published. Over time, open data kind of on a public area that we can access, it's now automated, and that's where things have changed for us over the years. Is like the system was initially a 100% manually data entry process, whereas now it's probably 50-50, more or less half and half between open data and sensors. So I'm going to go through some examples. If you're a MapAlerter council, you get access to an admin area of the website, and you can set up rules for when MetAirn's alerts are issued. So like councils typically would not send SMS messages because there's a cost implication So they might not send the weather warning if it's yellow, but they might and more than likely would if it was orange, and definitely red. So they can set their own rules and what channels are used. So like Evelyn mentioned a phrase a couple of times there which struck a chord, which was the data should be in the most appropriate format. And this, what you're looking at on screen, is the way the data is presented by Éireann. They use an open standard called CAP. It's a common alert protocol, and it's an international standard. And you can see it down at the bottom. The geocode, which is the FIP codes, gives Cork and Kerry. So that weather warning was just issued to Cork and Kerry subscribers last March. And what MapAlerter was able to do in a very timely manner was to convert that open data into an email and send it out to upwards of 6,000 subscribers in County Cork, not Cork City, just County Cork. And if I can go on a bit, you can see the text message on the top left that was used for that alert. So we convert that open data into 160 characters or less of short text. We give the start reason for the weather warning and the severity, which is level orange, and we give the county. So it resonates with the person who's receiving that text. A different warning, you can see we have a link into Limerick Council Twitter account. So nobody from staff had to tweet this. We were able to tweet it. We picked up the word orange, so we're able to put in orange emojis. We picked up the word wind, so we have a wind emoji, and we're making it a little bit more interactive. And we're linking back to the source data, which Rhoda would have mentioned as well, back to met.ie. And all that rule-based system, who gets alerted, what channels, that all takes about 3 minutes. That open data, so we're constantly checking for updates. Moving to the next topic, so the EPA takes in water quality samples at bathing water locations across the country that are published by the local authority to the EPA. But it's the journey that data takes. We'll just take a look. So they have open data for the locations, the measurement data. So that's like the E. coli levels and different things in the water. And if certain levels are poor water quality is reached, or they predict it's going to be reached, they API, as they call it. What the API, for anyone who doesn't know, is kind of like a programmatic way that services like MapAlerter can talk to the EPA servers without a human in the middle. And different to Éireann's data, this is how the EPA are presenting the data. It's extremely neat for someone who's a nerd like me. We're able to pull out this data. You can see start dates. I think one of the most important one is the incident expected duration, somewhere in the middle there. So we know that this is going to be a 3-day event from the 12th of July at that Ross Beach, Killala. And apart from data, you can see what Fingal are have recently started publishing this data just for updates. This is just a confidence system to let people know in Fingal that the water quality in Sutton is still excellent. It was excellent 2 weeks ago. It was excellent 2 weeks before that. So subscribers can opt in at a beach level for any of these beaches around the country. Meanwhile, a couple of weeks back in Clare, you can see Kilkee had a warning, and this is a separate email that would have went to subscribers of that beach, probably around County Clare. We have a link back to the PDF, which is the beach note or the poster that's put up outside the beach to do not swim. We see that that nice piece of how long is this going to last is put in plain text, so we're able to create a well-read email out of that text. All the data from the locations we're able to map. We put it up on the MapAlerter.ie website. On that screen, you can see that there's 4, whenever the screenshot was taken not so long ago, there were 4 active warnings around the country. The rest are have good quality. There's no active warnings on them. And you can see that we're tweeting ourselves on this. So we're able to turn the EPA data into a nice tweet, and we can link this up with Cunningham to their own warnings automatically, which is the key word here, that there's nobody manually pressing a button to do this. Moving across, and I suppose like credit to the Department of Housing and Local Government and Planning, they were able to get 31 planning registers and merge them together and create a national planning data set of applications over the last number of years. And Marie also mentioned Fingal have been doing this independently themselves over the past 10 years or so. I think it was 2010, as AnnMarie mentioned, when this came out. And MapAlerter, in and around that time, has been pulling data from Fingal's open data portal over the last number of years. So Fingal use kind of a version of MapAlerter with their own branding, and you can see halfway down they issue a weekly planning alert to people, and that tells people in Fingal what planning is taking place in and around their locality. So they're saving that person a lot of time potentially searching and scouring through planning registers. So you're proactively telling them this is what's in your area, it's the local aspect. You can browse a page, you can get the heads up information about the application, and that blue hyperlink on the pop or down here, the maroon one, you can see it's linking back to Fingal's planning register to the file. So you're actually saving that person who may not be too savvy with the internet. You're saving them a link, a journey of having to search for that data. You're bringing them right to the correct part of the Fingal website. And again, that goes out by email to Fingal Alerts subscribers and MapAlerter subscribers. Every Monday afternoon, alerts are issued. A lot of council staff, particularly engineers, will be familiar with a website. This is the next topic called waterlevel.ie. And this is the OPW's open data. So this is authorities. These are based, I think there's 400 odd sensors around the river networks across Ireland. But this data is used quite extensively by councils. So I think it's important to show how councils are reusing open data from other public bodies. So we're bringing that in, much like the layout from the beach web page we have on MapAlerter.ie. You can see this is just, you can search by county. So this is a snapshot of the different sensor locations in County Kerry, and we are showing pretty much what you might see to this point. It's a kind of a 24-hour chart of the water flow. It's going down obviously here, but what is different than waterlevel.ie is on the left-hand side. You, as a member of the public or a council member of staff, you can actually subset a level. You can use a slider and say, well, when that sensor goes above 1.5 meters, I want to get an alert. And you can set it up as a member of council staff that you get SMS, email, smartphone apps like we link with Telegram. We have our own app. So that's saving a member of staff probably pressing F5 under level.ie during winter season, or if there's heavy rain. You're actually letting that, we're doing that work for you. When it goes past a certain trigger height that might lead to sandbags, it's our job to tell you that, and it's worked well over the years. And again, these are the type of emails. So in this Carrick-on-Shore example, there was a trigger height, as we call it, set for 3 meters. The OPW published a 3.151 meter reading, and that triggered MapAlerter to send that email to a subscriber. And all this open data we're reusing is published on our GIS. Although some of it might be polygons or lines, if you're state of mind, we turn everything into a point. We like to make it look like Google Maps. It's familiar to someone with low to middle web experience. You just tap a point and you get information about it. Now the navy points here are pretty much the local authorities' open and planning data in most cases there. The blue is TIIs, road temperatures, and then you've started the light blue. Then the main blue one is the river network, or the river sensors, the OPW sensors, and the brown at the coast is obviously the beach location. That's just it for now, but you can actually say we turn off those layers. We're now using third-party data from another agency, which is the Property Price Register, and this is just to give the MapAlerter subscribers a little bit of local knowledge of their area. So you can drill in any of those clusters, and this is Kenmare, and you can tap on a house, and the pop-up is very neat. It shows, again, going back to what Rhoda's saying, we give the source, we say what that property sold for, the date. So I think we're going back 3-4 years at the moment. Otherwise there'll be a huge cluster of data, and that email goes out as a digest every weekend saying the following 2 properties, or you won't last week in your area have been marked as sold. If there's no property sold, you won't get an email, but for a council that doesn't send too many notices on MapAlerter, this is a nice data set to keep people engaged with the service and to know that they're getting something. One of the more topical ones obviously in the past year and a half was a great work by Éireann and the Department of Health.
Sorry, Brendan. I'm just letting you know that we need to.
Last slide.
So apologies. Yeah.
No, that's fine, Aisling. Thanks. Just to say, to finish up, so we're turning that data on the MapAlerter map into the local electorate areas and for Kenmare district. And again, you're getting an email every Thursday evening when the Open Data Hub for COVID opens that. So listen, that's pretty much it. Slightly over, Aisling, but you can visit our mapalerter.ie/councils if you want to see the list of open data that we're using. So thanks for your attention.
Thanks very much, Brendan. If anyone has any questions for Brendan, please pop them into the Q&A function, and if we don't get to them, we will be doing that list of questions. And I'm going to hand over now to Colm McQuinn, our Information and Data Management Officer with Fingal County Council.
Hi, everybody. I suppose mine is going to be a very non-technical presentation, and what I'm really looking at is kind of the benefits of, or one of the potential benefits of the use of open data from a purely selfish time management point of view. As most of you will be familiar, you will hear journalists quote it all the time. All public bodies are subject to freedom of information legislation, which should really be called freedom to access public records. So members of the public can ask for their own records, which would be personal, and then they can ask for any other records that they're interested in, which would be non-personal records. And since the legislation was introduced, the first version I think was 1998. I was in Dublin Castle with Minister Etta Fitzgerald when she announced it, and there were civil servants fainting and collapsing all over the place at the idea that we would actually, have to provide public information if we were asked. So we've had quite a shift from then. And I suppose this new initiative is another phase. Instead of requiring people to ask, it's a step further. Why don't we just make it available so they don't have to ask? They just have to go and find it for themselves. Anybody involved in responding to FOIs, and we would have staff in every department that would have to respond to FOI requests, know that it's a very onerous task. It's very time consuming. It's on top of all the work that you do already. And in the last 5 years, certainly from 2014 when the Act was renewed up to 2019, according to the Office of the Information Commissioner, the number of requests generally has increased somewhere between 30 and 40%. So even in the last couple of years, staff in all departments, in all government departments and local authorities are feeling this increase in interest and increase in demand. And I suppose an open data is a potential solution to that. So that's why I have those figures there. Next slide, please, Lisa. So I did a look through each local authority and every department. They have to publish their stats at the end of the year. It's called a disclosure log. How many requests did you get? How many non-personal ones? So those are the figures. So we would have had, roughly 300 in terms of FOI requests. Dublin City would have the most, but it's quite a burden for the whole year. And you can see that the vast majority of them are actually non-personal. And part of that is probably due to the data protection coming in, which people are more familiar with, so they can now ask for their personal data outside of FOI. So we would have a lot more non-personal data, and therefore non-personal data that potentially could be released via open data. Next slide there, Lisa, please. This is just an analysis we have of that year of all those requests in terms of where the burden is falling on our individual departments. And I would imagine most other local authorities are similar. Housing, a huge number. Now that would be personal and non-personal, and planning as well. But all departments are affected, as you can see, environment and corporate affairs and architects. So it affects every department. They all get FOIs. But if you were looking at, HR is very small because that would be personal, and a percentage of the housing would be personal as well. So that was just kind of where they lie. And as I say, I would imagine most departments have something similar. Next slide there, Lisa, please. So if we were to take a particular year, and these are just stats, for 2019, say we had almost 300 requests, and if 70% of them are non-personal, and I'm just giving you an idea of who they come from. Obviously, journalists is quite interesting, maybe a campaign group or a lobby group. We do get non-personal requests from private individuals who have a particular interest in something going on in their own area, and the same from businesses. So they're the people who are making the requests, and the vast majority are non-personal. So next slide, Lisa, there, please. Because we have to publish, a record of, well, how many non-personal requests did we get? Who did they come from? Every local authority can go back to that disclosure log from last year and have a look at what did people ask for. Because, for example, there are certain requests that we get every year. How much did you spend on Halloween cleanup? How much do you spend on cleaning graffiti? How much do you spend on Christmas lights? Who do you give grants to? How much? How many? Cycling infrastructure, and it changes obviously as topics become more popular and less popular. I just picked out a few, and the reason I picked out some of those is some of them are repetitive, and some of those contain data that could be just made available through open data, so people would not have to then submit an FOI request to find that out, and the staff in whatever department they're doing don't have to go through the laborious process of responding to them in the kind of formal FOI process, which is quite burdensome. Next slide there, please. I think that's the previous one. And I suppose the other thing to be aware of is outside of FOI, we also get a number of requests for access to information on the environment. It's just another piece of legislation. Obviously, all of those requests are for non-personal data. The definition of environmental information is extremely wide and covers almost everything. And again, a lot of the information that people ask for has already been presented internally to councils, in council meetings, you know, in engagement with local communities. It's already there, and I would think that is one area where those data sets are probably ideal for open data. So next slide, please. This is just a few. You can just have a read of, you know, cleaning costs, a Greater Dublin project, hedge cutting, tree cutting. We regularly, I would say we have them every year. You know, your hedge cutting schedule, how many trees do you cut? Have you got a tree survey? An awful lot of that material could easily be suitable for open data. So it's a case of doing this audit that has been mentioned earlier and identifying those data sets, maybe having a look at what were we asked for before, how many of those could we just make release through open data. So next slide there, please. Now, I think we've missed one on stats. So one of the things I did, there should be a slide there somewhere where I worked out if we were to answer even 10 or 20% of those FOIs via open data, so that when somebody puts in the request to me, I go, I'm not sending that onto the department because I can direct you to open data. And if even 10 or 20% of those people or of those requests could be dealt with outside of open data, there is a huge saving in terms of staff time and energy and copying and releasing data. And I had worked out a figure, I don't see it on the slide there, but it would be a huge saving. I suppose as an FOI officer who deals with these requests and manages them and sends them on to staff, that would be my message to all those departments is look at what data you can put out, and it will save you time. As I say, if we could save 10 or 20%, we'd be talking 20 or 30. And across, if we were to put that across all the Dublin regions, then you know, you're talking about a significant amount of time saved by staff by simply letting that data out via open data. I'm not going to go through this wording of the RPSI, which is a request that we deal with as well. I suppose the emphasis is in yellow. The focus is now moving from not just waiting until a request comes in, but preempting that by releasing the data. Identifying this could be released and it becoming part of somebody's project plan or whatever, that okay, this is something that we can release as we move through a project to keep people up to date, in which case we will avoid having to respond to FOI requests. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, so those are the things I would recommend. Have a look at your disclosure log. Identify data sets that are repetitive, that could easily be done through open data, and in the next year go, we're just going to release that information rather than wait for the request to come in. Have a look at your AI responses. What were you asked? Could that data have been released? And you know, be aware that when you do an FOI request, in the legislation and the guidance, it says once you release those records, they are released to the world. It becomes open data anyway. So why not do that? Don't wait for the requests. Okay. I'll answer any questions at the end if you have them. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks, Colm. Some really useful tips there on how to start with releasing open data or data that you already have and release it in an open format on your open data portals. I'm just conscious we're going a bit over, so we're going to go straight to this Q&A, and I have Alan Murphy, Regional Manager of Smart Dublin, to manage this Q&A.
Hi, afternoon everybody. Can you hear me okay, Aisling?
Yep.
Yeah, coming through. Okay, great presentations from everybody. Maybe just to bounce back to Rhoda, you talk about maybe the potential consequences of non-compliance with the EU directive for the councils. Is Rhoda still with us? No? Have we lost Rhoda, Lisa?
She's coming back on now.
Okay. Right, just while we're waiting, Evelyn, I know you've got a 1 p.m. broadcast to do, and if you're there, could you talk about the culture at Éireann in terms of driving open data? Any tips for the councils to really drive that internal culture?
I think because of the broadcast, we have lost
We've lost
there, so she's jumped off.
Can you hear me,
Okay.
Alan? Sorry, it just took a while for the sound to come back on.
Yeah, go ahead, Rhoda. Got you now. Did you get my question about consequences for non-compliance with the directive? Just maybe talk about that.
Yes, well, I suppose public bodies are required to, under the directive, to release data that they hold. They're not required to create new data sets or to have to, you know, put in an enormous effort to make a data set available. But we would encourage cooperatively with reusers. And as part of the regulations that are coming into force, as I mentioned, there's a request procedure where public bodies will have 20 days to respond to a request, or 40 days if it's an extensive request. But if they refuse a request, they have to explain the reasons for the refusal and also give the means of redress, which is to the Information Commissioner. And again, this will all have to be on an Open Data Directive statement will have to be on each local authority's website explaining this. But the consequences, if you don't comply with obviously the Information Commissioner will look at all the facts and will make a determination. And if you're requested to release that data and you don't comply with that request, within the regulations, there's a Class A fine, which is up to €5,000 of a fine. It also mentions up to 6 months in prison, but I don't think we intend sending, hopefully nobody gets sent to prison over open data. But it is a Class A fine as recommended in the legislation. So.
Okay, wow. Okay, thanks, Rhoda. Brendan, maybe back to you. You know, you're sort of representing the market that gets value out of open data, and you're creating a service. Any tips on how the councils could improve their approach to open data? You're on mute, Brendan.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah. Alan, I would have probably answered that differently about 4 or 5 years ago when councils were starting their open data journey, but that planning example is a really good one. Like if you take 31 common data sets that are used within local authorities, the planning registers, and put them up centrally to the department, that makes it a lot easier for a business or a company to draw down, because really app developers or companies like that, they're not going to build an app around one council's data. They're going to build an Irish app in the majority of cases. So you're going to get more traction, more downloads, and so on with the business use. So if councils can take that approach and work together, like there's a lot of open data guys I know who are very good at that anyway, the GIS people, the mapping people, kind of work in meetings together. So if like take libraries as a data set, if you wanted to have libraries, it's better to have a national library data set than 31 data sets that someone's job is to merge up. So like on data.gov.ie at the moment, I think there's an individual data set for libraries, but there should be probably a national data set called libraries. So that type of thing. But no, it's only like some more data. We're hungry for it at this point, and we know how well it works when it's up in place. I know the councils use IceCast quite a lot for road temperatures in and amongst themselves, but if that could be shared with the public to show when a ground has hit sub-zero, then it's something we'd be able to share onwards to the public through an alert system, that type of thing. I think I suppose the Irish water data, the outages, the councils are putting that up manually at the moment in most cases. If that could be kind of pulled from Irish Water, it's less of a council request, but more of an Irish Water request. It means you'd have a national water outage alert system in MapAlerter. So that's probably the best suggestions I'd have, Alan. Okay,
super. Thanks, Brendan. I'm conscious of time, but maybe just to bring Colm in. FOIs are on the rise, clearly, Colm. Any very practical tips for each department within each council? Where do they start, maybe to look back on the opportunities to reduce the FOI burden?
Well, I think it's a good place to start. Like I said in my recommendations, is to look at the disclosure log and see, well, you know, what responses did we have to do? Say we're the planning department in Fingal. You know, these are the FOIs we had, these are the responses. How many of those could have been avoided by publishing that data on open data? You know, a lot of people aren't aware of that disclosure log, but it is a very useful tool in saying what did we have to release, which ones are repetitive, which ones we have to do every year, and identify data sets. And the same with AIE, which would also be relevant for planning as well as environment. And that would be my recommendation to our own decision makers in Fingal, is to look at the disclosure log, identify some data sets and start with those. And I suppose the second one is in the same way that we, you know, when FOI came in, we had to get people to think always everything you do, every communication, every record you create, you need to be aware it is subject to FOI. In this way, it's, you know, every kind of data set you put together, has it got open data potential? And I suppose the key is for all of us to start thinking that way all the time.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll start wrapping up. Just for the audience here, the slide you're looking at is the extraction and publication process that Smart Dublin is involved in. So we work with the 4 Dublin local authorities. Some of them have their own respective open data portal. You see Fingal's one there on the left-hand side. Through working with different data owners, we publish to Dublinked, the regional portal. That goes on to DPER's national portal, and on it goes to Europe. So all the data sets that get published by the councils in Dublin go through that process. So Lisa, if you want to just move to the next slide. And again, just a slide to sort of recap on some of the things you've heard, tips for all the service owners, not just within the Dublin councils. I know we've got guests from other councils on the call. Think about what Colm has said, your disclosure logs. Think about project initiations that are happening. Are there data conversations within those project discussions, and a subset of those perhaps could be made open? I think Rhoda at the very start talked about every public sector body will have an open data liaison officer. These are the people for the councils in Dublin. And we've touched on different portals, and there's many data sets being published across those different portals. So feel free to have a browse of those in your own time. Okay, that's a wrap from me. Aisling, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Yep, so as I said at the beginning, the recording and the slides will be made available, and as we are kind of ramping up for this new EU directive, we'll be sending out communications to staff. So that's in Fingal County Council, but likewise for the other local authorities through our work with Smart Dublin, there'll be information put out to staff as well. So yeah, you'll see more about open data over the next couple of weeks and months, and your open data coordinators may be in touch with you as well. Yeah, so first of all, I'd just like to thank our Chief Executive, AnnMarie Farrelly, for giving our opening address, Evelyn Cusack, who unfortunately had to leave to do the weather, and all of our speakers who gave really good and interesting presentations on the usage of open data, in particular in local authorities, which was really interesting. So thanks very much to all our speakers, and especially to Lisa Deacon in IT and Fingal, who's been kind of helping us with this coordination of this webinar. So thanks very much, everyone, and I'll let you get to your lunch now.